Dr. Ioannis Kyriakantonakis is a teaching associate at the National Kapodistrian University of Athens and at the Hellenic Open University, and has held many research positions, such as at the Hellenic Institute of Venice and the Center for Asia Minor Studies in Athens. He has conducted postdoctoral research on the historical sociology of the Greek scholarly community of Constantinople, of the early modern times, and is here with us today, though, to speak to us about the relatively unknown Kigala family, the family patriarch Matthaios Kigalas and his sons Ioannis, Demetrios, and Hilarion, who, after Cyprus's loss to the Ottomans in 1571, fled to Venice and ingratiated themselves into the Venetian society and the intelligentsia. Yanni, thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm really excited for this episode. Yeah, thank you.
Really, many thanks for my part. I'm happy and intrigued and thrilled to answer to your questions.
So I always like starting off every episode with a little bit of context, historical context. We're talking about the 16th and 17th centuries. So what is Cyprus? What does the Eastern Mediterranean look like? Meaning the political and religious landscape.
So we are in the towards the beginning of the 17th century. That Cyprus is still in the aftermath of its conquest during the Venetian Ottoman War of 1570-1573. And we know that despite the Venetian resistance, the Ottomans prevailed. And we know, of course, of the incidents, of the tragic incidents occurring during the sieges of Nicosia and Famagusta. We know the devastation of the Greek people, the population decline, etc. In fact, Cyprus was one of the last Ottoman conquests in the Eastern Mediterranean, which were followed by atrocities, Ottoman atrocities, and a social, economic, and intellectual stagnation of the territory in question. As happened in Crete, we can, I think, safely say that a society acquainted with the Renaissance and stepping into modern life according to Western standards knew a cultural, social, and economic regression, not to speak of the despotism and oppression that the members of that society had to endure. That is, of course, not to say that the previous Venetian regime was liberal or favorable to Greek people. Religiously, the island, after the Ottoman conquest, remained important for Eastern Christianity, and it had been made archbishopric since the early Christian era. So it's an important ecclesiastical see. Gradually, and until the 18th century, we have the monastery of Kiku, the famous monastery, developing into a center for education and copying of manuscript. And the island did not stop providing Constantinople with gifted intellectuals, individuals, serving the Orthodox Church. Cyprus was not, I would say, I want to add some things about the church, that it was not an exception to Ottoman policies of tolerating Christian communities after the initial shock of the conquest. The Christian communities were tolerated by the Ottomans, who acknowledged the position of the Orthodox Church in flocking Christian subjects. It was also no exception to politics of Islamization and repopulation of the occupied territory, given the great number of victims in the Ottoman-Venetian War. In Cyprus and later on in Crete, the Ottoman policies created a new invading culture of the conquerors and laid the foundations of strife between the two communities. Moreover, according to the Ottoman political status, the Patriarchate of Constantinople took the ecclesiastic control and supervision of all territories belonging to the empire. The Synod of Constantinople appointed all bishops in a vast area falling within its jurisdiction, that is, from the Balkans to Eastern Anatolia and Cyprus. And Cyprus was also in the periphery, the geographical periphery of and the influence of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which is also an important ecclesiastical institution, appearing as influential in the dynamics of the 17th century, with its leaders struggling, among others, to keep the control of the holy shrines of Palestine.
Now, within this, I guess the past century, Cypriots in Cyprus, they've been under Venetian control prior to the Ottomans, so they've had a lot of contact with Roman Catholics, and this is not the first time. Obviously, the Orthodox East has been having dealings with the Roman Catholic West. How are these two communities perceived within each other's ecclesiastical spheres? So, I mean, how were the Greeks perceived by the West, and how were Roman Catholics or Franks perceived by Eastern Orthodox Christians?
To answer this question, one has to bear in mind that following the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottomans, there had been a long period during which contacts between the Orthodox and the West were virtually non-existent. This period lasted about a century. Under the new political order, the remaining Orthodox bishops denounced the 1439 Council of Church Union, the Council of Ferrara-Florence, as an act of submission to the Pope of Rome and as an outcome of violence and blackmail. But the idea of church unity persisted among many Catholic scholars who referred to a state of historical concessio in Latin, and a state of agreement, sort of speak, an agreement of the two churches of traditional Christendom, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, but this agreement was usually understood on the basis of a unilateral understanding of that concordance, according to which the Petrine Center urged the seceded peripheries to rejoin the true church, the Vera Ecclesia. Admittedly, since the Council of Florence, if not from earlier times, the contacts between Catholics and Orthodox were in general terms defined by the perceived or real superiority of Latin clergy towards the Greeks. Superiority in learning and education, in administration and financial means, diplomatic and political influence, etc. And the post-Tridentine Catholicism, that is the Catholic Church after the very significant, very important Council of Trent, late 16th century, developed a persisting derogatory approach to the Greek other. This Greek other, this Christian other, who had to be reintegrated. And Greeks were often regarded with scorn as ignorant and heretic. We see here the function of all these stereotypes, fallen to a state of spiritual decadence, reflecting their political decline and the subservience of their church to the Ottomans. On the other side, many Greek Orthodox theologians who tried to reverse these arguments about the true church by presenting Roman Catholicism as a corrupt, worldly institution. In the course of the polarity between Catholic and Orthodox, or Latin and Greeks, religious and confessional rifts often combined with national cultural stereotypes or simply with political and historical rivalries. Nonetheless, personal contacts between religious scholars were often imbued by a spirit of reconciliation, mutual respect, and reverence of the antique, ancient intellectual traditions those scholars represented. Now, about, if I can say about some local churches, like the Church of Cyprus. For example, in the case of the Church of Cyprus, they preserved stronger intellectual ties with the West. We have a sense of more extrovert compared to the more introvert churches in the Balkans, the Asia Minor, etc. And many Cypriot scholars lean towards Catholicism, hoping for an intervention of Western powers and the papacy in favor of their liberty and protection. This is an old story. Of course, these plans of church union would never be accepted by the Ottomans, have no meaning since the Ottomans were powerful. But the influence of Western Catholic culture and even Jesuit education in Greek intellectual life was substantial. It was, in fact, those tendencies of unity and Latinization that the Orthodox leaders of the 17th century struggled to tackle. We have a Cypriot clerical scholars, teachers, and writers, important names like Neophytos Rodinos, who were regarded as pro-Catholic, advocating the essential communion and unity of Western and Eastern churches, that is, the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox churches. To bear in mind that these same tendencies, pro-Latin tendencies, also existed in Constantinople during the 16th and early 17th century. This is not known, of course. It's something relatively hidden. That there was this idea of church unity, tendencies favoring church unity.
You make a really interesting point, and I just want to read a quote from you. You make the point that within a century after the end of Byzantium, i.e. the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Roman Empire, transformed from a disintegrating institution into a dynamic network of institutions, agents, and ideas. What is it that you meant by that exactly? And I think right after that we'll jump right into the Kigala family, but I think that might be centered to the conversation around the Kigala family.
Yes, I mean that within the theocratic context of the Ottoman social life and mentality, religious leaders sometimes enjoyed an immense, compared to other members of the Raya, of the flock, of the subject of the sultans, an immense prestige. On a second level, they exercised power. These bishops, prelates, ecclesiastical leaders, power granted to them by the sultans. There was a regime of ecclesiastical prerogatives that the church enjoyed, and they tried to preserve it, to preserve this regime in every possible way. In fact, the Ottoman conquest signified the gradual, as we already said, expansion of the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople, because the Ottomans saw in the Patriarch a sort of communal leader they regarded the Patriarch as a communal leader representing and flocking the whole of Orthodox Christians in their territories. The importance of that position is manifested by the fierce competition developing between several agents of power, social, economic, and spiritual power, for its occupation, and the very usual change of persons, of occupants, in that high position, in that throne of the most important prestige and power. At the same time, the division of the Western Christian world after the Martin Luther's Reformation contributed to the rise of the theological and ecclesiastical prestige on the ideological scale, on the ideological level of the Orthodox. The Orthodox that were seen by both parts of Western rivalry, I mean Protestant and Catholic, as possible allies.
It's in this world that I would say, the Kigala family is, at the center of this sort of transformation. So let's talk about the Kigala family, and maybe you can start off by giving us an overview of the family patriarch, Matthaios Kigalas.
There is this Cypriot family, probably of Italian origin. We know about the grandfather of the family, the father of Matthaios, Demetrios Kigalas, that he was very skilled in military matters, and the source mentions that he increased the glory received from his great-grandfather by fighting for his country against the Turks in the Cypriot War. So we see that it's an old family, noble, possibly noble. Families like that, we have the Denores family in Cyprus, the Podokatari, the Sozomenoi. I mean, it's not a unicum in the case of Cyprus. They live in this period of course, as we said, the conquest of Cyprus, but also this intensifying phenomena in religious relations. We have the Catholic Church intensifying efforts of cultural and religious penetration into the world of the Orthodox and the East. The Orthodox side is also ideologically mobilized in the direction of participating in the religious disputes of early modernity. The historical setting, more or less, we talked about. I would like to say some things that, okay, they have this networking and multiple encounters, but okay, we can talk about it later. Now about Matthaios, who was born in 1580, the first generation of Cypriots after the conquest by the Ottomans, a decade earlier. He was born in Cyprus, where he was ordained priest. So he takes this, let's say, ecclesiastical career, but he lived a big part of his life in Constantinople and mainly in Venice, where he served as a vicar of the Orthodox metropolis of Philadelphia, which is the name for the Orthodox Diocese of Venice and Italy. Even today, I think it's called like that. He was appointed at the Church of San Giorgio, St. George, San Giorgio di Greci, San George of the Greeks, which is the ecclesiastical and spiritual center of the Greek community of Venice, and I would say the whole Greek diaspora in Italy. It is in this church in the Sestiere in the area of Castello, which is a very central neighborhood area in Venice.
Mhm.
A few minutes walk from St. Mark's Cathedral, and it is now there the see of the Greek Institute for Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Study that you mentioned earlier. So after this initial stay in Italy, we know that Matthaios Kigalas returned to Cyprus. I mean, he doesn't abandon the island for good and forever. He returned more than once to the island, and it was there that he was probably ordained archimandrite. During these trips from Venice to Cyprus, he spent some time also in Constantinople, where he became familiar with the clerical environment of the Patriarchate.
So you had mentioned earlier that he may have been of Venetian or Genoese descent, though he is clearly
Yes.
a Greek, part of the Greek priesthood. So the fact that he presumably speaks Greek, obviously is of the Orthodox Rite. Was this common for Venetians, or is this unusual for the these affluent families of Venetian extraction?
I don't think it was uncommon. There were these families that I mentioned before that also in Crete, that were of Italian origin, but they integrate in the Greek population. They integrate in the Greek culture of the Cyprus. I wouldn't exclude this Italianness of Kigalas' origin.
Why was Venice such a popular destination for affluent Greeks? What drew them there, and then also why would they have even allowed this Greek community to have opened up an Orthodox church in Venice?
To begin with, Venice was a popular destination because it was the metropolis of the Cypriots before the Ottoman conquest. It is an important destination for the many career opportunities, the tracks to social ascendancy that this dynamic urban center presents, offered. I would also add that in the collective imagination and the memory of a number of Greek-speaking families, Venice preserved an important position, a strong cultural and ethnic affinity. They felt, these people, a strong cultural and ethnic affinity to Italy, and in particular the most serene republic. Venice and Padua must have looked like a shelter and point of reference for the uprooted scholars, theologians, merchants, and nobles of Cyprus and later on Crete, who did not wish to live in the prospect in the collective depression of the first decades of the Ottoman rule. We have to remember, of course, the University of Padua as an alma mater of most pre-independent Greeks who sought university education. And we can mention, I think, some important, significant names as Jason Denores, Leodios Estratios. We talk about, I think I mentioned Noftos Rodinos, who had followed similar paths.
Yeah, and these are all Cypriot intellectuals who made their way
Yes.
west or to Constantinople. You know, it's interesting because like this, Matthaios is a fascinating character. I mean, he's been described as a Greek amphibian, and that's an interesting analogy. Well, what is meant by that, by calling him a Greek amphibian?
That changed the denomination that was floating between, in an opportunistic way between the Eastern and the Roman churches. In his question, I think the reason that gave rise to this accusation, to this description, was that he was changing, let's say, not he was changing, that the person who had come to contact with some Calvinist Protestant agents operating in Constantinople. You mentioned that he had an involvement in the Lucarian and the Lucaris question. Maybe we should explain what is this question. Okay, it's a famous incident of religious contacts, of religious dynamics in the 17th century. Practically the adoption of a clearly Calvinist Protestant agenda by an ecumenical patriarch in Constantinople, that is Cyril Lucaris. Cyril Lucaris, who did not go through this agenda, did not go through this program alone, but in cooperation with the Protestants. One of these Protestants was chaplain of the Dutch embassy, Antoine Lezer. And it is with this Lezer that Matthaios Kigalas held a correspondence, and he was actually asking him to mediate to the Ottomans, to ask them to help the Orthodox in Cypriot against the Catholics. So in this correspondence, he has a clearly anti-Catholic stance. And it is the same person who has this anti-Catholic agenda, this anti-Catholic stance, and who is a correspondent of a Calvinist, who later on implores the Catholic, later on addresses the Catholic in order to have his sons, his three sons, admitted to the Greek College of Rome, the Collegio Greco of Rome. And this made this great bibliographer of modern Greek literature, Emile Legrand, attributed these negative terms to the Kigalas family, particularly to Matthaios. But it was not only Legrand who was using this kind of vocabulary of amphibious, of opportunistic, and so on and so forth. It was also other Catholic, Roman Catholic prelates who had used it much earlier.
What were Kigalas' contributions to literature and scholarship during this time?
I think that one should stress among his writings, and I must say that from this family, from his family, and compared to his son, I think that his literary legacy, his work, is more important. Is more important than the work of his sons. Although he had, academically, he had received not a high education his sons had received. Now I would stress the new synopsis of various histories as his most influential popular book. That was a compilation of sources referring to the new order of things in the East after the Ottoman conquest and the relations between the Ottomans and the high clergy of the Orthodox. It talks about the politics toward the Ottoman politics towards the subjected populations. It refers to the historical and cultural background of the Christians and Muslims in Eastern Mediterranean, in Palestine and Egypt. It is for these reasons that it's an important and vivid testimony. It was published, I think, twice in Venice, but somehow it was overshadowed by the very popular chronograph or historical book of Dorotheos, Pseudo-Dorotheos of Monovasia, on which it largely drew. I would also mention Syntagmation among his works containing invocation, quite a popular manual that includes the dedicatory epistle to Francisco Morosini, a most merciful friend of the community of the Greeks. Also the transcription to scholarly Greek of the Erophili of Hortatsis, a work of the so-called Cretan Renaissance, and also the translation of a number of verses from Tassos Jerusalem Liberata.
Before we move on to Matthaios' sons, I have one last question about Matthaios. His religious affiliations, they've been described sometimes as opportunistic. What's your take on it? How do you interpret his actions, and what would they say? What would they tell us about the religious dynamics of the period?
I think that it is more significant to point out that Matthaios Kigalas was active, was familiar with different ecclesiastical and religious environments. The environment of Venetian Cyprus, that of Venice, Rome, but also that of Constantinople and the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarchy. And the same thing happened with his son Hilarion. We can, instead of sticking with this idea of opportunism and opportunistic role of Kigalas, we can talk about mobility. This mobility between Cyprus, Venice, Padova, Constantinople, the islands, Cyprus again. We can see the versatility of his and his sons' careers, and this religious adaptation that maybe we implied before, his ability to adapt to different environments.
So Matthaios Kigalas had three sons,
Yes.
Ioannis, Demetrios, and most famously Hilarion, who we'll talk about in a bit. Let's start off with his son, Ioannis Kyriakantonakis. And for the record, I believe all three sons were very, very educated, very scholarly in many different ways.
Yes.
But what sort of schooling did he receive, and what positions did he hold, so on and so forth?
Ioannis Giovanni Kigala was less known in the Greek circles, in the Greek intellectual context. because he worked in Italy, where he distinguished himself as an academic. He became professor of Aristotelian logic and philosophy at the University of Padua, and he was earlier teacher, professor of Greek letters at the Hellenic College of Rome, the Collegio Greco. He wrote on the teaching of these subjects, but the works he published are really few. He studied at the Collegio Greco. All of the three sons, after the father's request, studied at this Catholic college, established by the popes of Rome to educate Greek people who had to come from the Ottoman Empire. The pupils, the students of the Collegio, were Greeks coming from the Ottoman Empire. And you can understand, of course, that apart from the educational aspect, there is also the confessional, the proselytizing aspect here at stake. Generally speaking, these two aspects coexist in the 17th century, education and confessionalism. So he studied at this, Ioannis studied at this college, at the Collegio Greco. At that time, the Collegio was controlled by the Jesuit orders, and he was supervised by eminent Jesuit scholars like Sforza Pallavicino and Tarquinio Galluccio. These are very important names in Jesuit scholarship. According to a source story, the history of the University of Padua by Charles Patin, Kigalas was admired and esteemed by the Roman masters, and it is evident that these Jesuit Catholic masters at the Collegio Greco, these masters of Roman intellectual elite, while they saw in his brother Hilarion a future clergyman, an ecclesiastical orator and a theologian, in Ioannis' case, they had discovered a scholar of Greek letters. I mean, his vocation was to become an academic university professor. We have to clarify that he didn't pursue the career of a humanist, but he was granted, he was attributed the title of Doctor of Philosophy, as well as that of theology. That was a common Jesuit training, and he directed his interest to the study of Aristotelianism, which was a traditional way to bridge theology and philosophy since the Middle Ages. And then from Rome, the interesting thing with Ioannis is that he did not remain in a framework in the academic environment of the Collegio Greco in Rome, but he moves to a more liberal, the more liberal environment of the University of Padova, where he occupied a high academic position of university professors. And he remained stable. He positioned himself at that university until his death.
Just curious, did any of his works survive to this day?
Yes, we have some works. Some works which are more devoted to the teaching of his subjects of logic and philosophy. There is an Elenchus Dissertationum and a Prelectionum Erudita Synopsis. He is also known for some nicely written epigrams. that appeared in illustrious editions around Europe.
So what about Demetrios Kigalas, his brother? Did he have similar schooling? What was his trajectory in his life?
We see the sons of Matthaios positioning themselves in the three academic fields available for their times from their times curricula. That is the liberal arts, in the case of Ioannis, theology, and in Demetrios' case, the applied science of medicine. But to begin with, Demetrios had also studied at the College of St. Athanasius of the Collegio Greco, and he practiced medicine in Venice and Spain. He was also interested in confessional and doctrinal matters, and in that respect, he tried to use his brother Hilarion's networks in his correspondence with the important French intellectuals. It is interesting to mention his service in the embassy of in the Venetian embassy of Madrid. He moved to Spain with Giorgio Cornelio, senator and ambassador to Madrid. And he was probably the doctor of Francisco Morosini during the Cretan War. And then we find him changing his loyalties and becoming the doctor of the Ottomans, of the Grand Vizier Kiprulu Zadeh Ahmed Fadil. And we see this really remarkable sense of loyalty, similar to that of his brother from Catholicism to Orthodoxy. Generally speaking, he was in closer contact with his brother Hilarion than to his other brother Ioannis.
So this finally brings us to one of the really interesting and I suppose somewhat controversial figure at the time. You know, he had a role in interfaith dialogue between the two churches. Well, before we get into that, maybe it might be a good idea for you to just revisit the main doctrinal controversies between Eastern Orthodox churches and the Protestant Calvinists that emerged in the period. And you know, what was his role? There's a lot of questions there to unpack, but you know, I'll leave that to you to help us kind of go through it.
It is difficult to provide a brief account of his life, of Hilarion's life, given the versatility of his biographical data. I would say that he's known from the office of the Archbishop of Cyprus, which he held later in his career in 1674, and also from the titles he was granted while he lived in Constantinople, where he was distinguished in the court of the patriarchs, as well as his co-authoring of the important historical and heretical work of Nectarios of Jerusalem. But his peregrination, his transfers are really difficult to follow. And so are his positionings between Jesuit order and the Orthodox Church. Probably we know that he was employed by the Jesuit order. We know, of course, that as his brothers, he studied at the Collegio Greco and the Greek college. But he did not, as his brother Ioannis did, he did not remain in Italy, but embarked into a long journey in the Orient, in the East, passing by islands, passing by the Pierotic, the Epirus, the continental Greece, Constantinople, Cyprus, Palestine. He is even mentioned, he's even met in Bucharest. So we have a real versatile figure, a multifaceted individual, who was a target, of course, of scorn, of criticism for this amphibious role, let's say. I would, okay, we can more or less understand the education that he had received, but he, as I said, he abandoned this safe prospect of an academic career, and he left for the Orient, for Greece. He was not the person destined to find peace in the educational vocation. And we soon, after his departure from Italy, we soon find him in Constantinople, teaching there. Probably in the beginning, he was teaching in the Jesuit school that was established in Pera, in Constantinople. And later, he was also teaching at the Patriarchal school. And that is, of course, striking. How could this person, the same person, be appointed to this institution in a so short period of time?
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because he didn't stay anywhere for a long time, as you said. I mean, Padua, Venice, Rome, Chios, Smyrni, Constantinople. Why was he constantly moving so much? Like, what prevented him from kind of establishing himself in one place?
I think that he was always regarded with suspicion. And also he was answering to challenges. He was open to new things, to new opportunities. But, this suspicion around his person, this suspicion of the Jesuit background, the Orthodox accused him of Latinism. The Jesuits accused him for treason. It did not allow him to establish, to position, as we say, himself within an institution, even in a city.
He had a role. I mean, it's very clear to me that he has a main role in interfaith dialogue between the churches. Now, what contributions did he make in that literary and religious landscape at the time? I know that there was a synod in Nicosia, and that he had a central role in that. Maybe you can describe to me what his roles were there and anywhere else for that matter.
I think the most important confessional role of Hilarion was his authoring, the composition of the Acts of the Synod of Nicosia in 1668. In that synod, the Church of Cyprus pronounced practically its doctrinal position on Calvinism. And we know that he composed and he translated into Latin the acts of that synod that they were sent to the Franciscans and to the French ambassador in Constantinople, who was interested in knowing the position of the Greek churches in regard to Calvinism, and more particularly in regard to the matter of transubstantiation during the Eucharist. That was a big controversy in the. We have to somehow understand the that era, that period. It was a period focusing on that doctrinal matters, and something that today would seem a clearly theoretical, theological question that would interest a few specialists. At that time, it was very important for the allegiance of the churches, for the ideological influence, and so on and so forth. So this French ambassador at Constantinople, de Nointel, was collecting these confessions of faith issued by the Orthodox Church to prove that the Orthodox and the Catholic were of the same opinion on that matter and against the Calvinists. And Kigalas was regarded as the man of this ambassador of Nointel and possibly of the Franciscans at Cyprus. So his role in that synod is very important, along his contribution to the writing, to the authoring of the previously mentioned tract, anti-heretical historical tract against the rule of the Pope, which is regarded as a work of Nectarios of Jerusalem, a very important Orthodox ecclesiastical figure, but there are scholars who really attribute this work to Hilarion. In any case, Hilarion helped Nectarios, contributed, particularly because of his knowledge of Latin sources, and he was extremely useful to the patriarchs of Jerusalem, who were radical, Orthodox radicals. So we see that he changed camps, let's say. He moved to the Orthodox side, not only to the patriarchs of Constantinople, who we could say that they were pro-Latin, but to a radical Orthodox patriarchate, that of Jerusalem.
You mentioned that he probably converted to Catholicism at some point. What's this based on?
We don't have acts of conversion because there was no an official ceremony, let's say, of people converting from Orthodox to Catholic. But his employment by the Jesuit is a clear indication that he was probably, and he was acting particularly in the first period of his preaching and stay in Greece, he was acting clearly and openly as a Catholic.
Looking back at the careers of Matthaios, his sons, Hilarion, what is the contribution to the broader history of the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches? What's their legacy? What do we learn from their role in the 16th and 17th centuries and the transformative time that was?
First of all, they present for modern researchers, they present an epistemological value as a case studies of religious contacts, religious dynamics, case studies of academic peregrination and career positioning. In their case, we can follow and use major analytical concepts and tools, among others, confessionalism, sociology of scholars, religious humanism, diaspora studies, or the biography and family history approach. And this is a sort of combined approach that I try to follow since this joint fellowship of Eastern Mediterranean Studies that I held in the 2022-2023. This is gave me the actually the possibility to conduct this research. It was a postdoc fellowship scheme by the Tati Center for Renaissance Studies and the Dumbarton Oaks Byzantine Studies program at Harvard. I will stress by repeating the aspects of Kigalas' cultural and geographical transfers, this mobility question, this aspect of mobility, the building of networks. They had networks, the encounters with several people, intellectuals, scholars, ecclesiastics, diplomats, that really enriched their early modern lives. We have this versatility in their careers, the readiness, the promptness to adapt to different contexts, to seize opportunities for improvement. And they serve, the Kigalas family serve as examples of the challenges faced by individuals seeking to reconcile conflicting faith traditions with educational and career opportunities. Within this context of 17th century Europe. And somehow these open-minded scholars who mastered Italian, Latin, and Greek languages did not stick with their assigned proselytizing roles, the strictly religious duties, but with their entangled trajectories, they managed to build bridges between culture, bridges between confessions, intellectual traditions, even cities and empires in the Eastern Mediterranean and Italy.
Yanni, thank you so much for this conversation today. This is a family that I've always been curious about.
Thank you too. It's a bit complicated material, and there are many, connections, aspects, ideas coming together. I hope that I was able to give to your audience an idea of how this family positioned in the 17th century landscape and intellectual field.
Yeah, I really hope that it inspires people to kind of look into this family a little bit more too, because you wouldn't know that they existed unless you went out of your way to try to find something about Cypriot intellectuals in the 16th and 17th century. And that's kind of a hard thing to do. And you're one of the few that I know who's looked into the Kigalas family, and I find them a very interesting family from Cyprus. Obviously, that is of interest to me, and I want to thank you once again, Yanni.
Thank you. I will look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much again.
Take care, Yanni. Have a great night.